Assassin's Creed Odyssey is easily the most controversial game in the series. It was really the core of the division between the newer and older fans of the franchise, and Ubisoft didn't really seem to care to appeal to the older fans to many people. At first, this also turned me away from the game, and after putting about 25 hours into it in 2018, I put the game down and called it one of the worst games I'd ever played. Now in 2024, I revisited the game, and man was I wrong on so many fronts, and not only is this game not horrible, but it's actually quite a great game. It of course does have many issues, and its connection to the franchise's existing lore and gameplay systems is quite lackluster. But the actual game here, in terms of both the story, the combat, and the general world and gameplay, is actually fantastic in pretty much every metric. Before we get into our discussion of the game in depth, this video will be very relaxed on the editing, and I'll just use videos of me just taking down cultists and doing some free roam as the background footage, so feel free to just listen. With that, let's get right into it. Starting with the story component of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I've got a lot to say. I'll preface this discussion by saying that I have not yet played the DLCs for the game, as I'm just wrapping up some other stuff such as the cultist storyline in the game, and so I'll get to those after, and we'll probably make a separate video discussing them. Anyway, getting into it, the story of this game started out really interesting, and the setting in the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta is an absolutely great setting to really feel the vibrance of ancient Greece, but also to understand its conflicts and its different people. The prologue with King Leonidas was an awesome sequence to start the game with, and set great expectations for me personally as to what the story would entail. Quickly, I'll also preface that what I want to do here is discuss my own personal thoughts on the story, and not so much a synopsis of the main story. I really did enjoy the story pretty much throughout its entirety, from the very beginning as Cassandra's introduction as a mercenary living on the small island doing menial tasks, to her major task of hunting down the cult across the Greek world. The game's story primarily focuses on finding Cassandra's mother, or Alexios depending on who you play as, and then trying to get the corresponding sibling out of their brainwashing of the cult. The entire journey of actually finding Cassandra's mother was extremely interesting, and I was engaged through every cutscene and every moment in which Cassandra desperately went from person to person across the entirety of the Greek world to all types of islands in order to find some clue as to where her mother went. Standout characters within this story would of course be Cassandra herself, her mother, and her brother. I also really enjoyed the few moments sprinkled throughout the game in which Cassandra interacted with her stepfather Nikolaos. Something the story did very well was display the trauma that Cassandra had from the night she was thrown off the cliff as a child, as the game constantly brought this up in conversations with other characters and really did establish it as a core driving point to the character development of Cassandra throughout the entire story. From a simple mercenary to the one the rest of the world called the Eagle Bearer, Cassandra becomes someone feared in the Greek world, and this development was extremely satisfying to get to. The few flashbacks to Cassandra's memories with her mother and her father, in addition to the long-lost memories of Leonidas within her own spear as her ancestor, was also extremely interesting, and in particular the memories with her mother makes the player also yearn to reunite with Cassandra's mother and bring the family back together. Characters from Athens were also the star of the show in terms of the side characters, with particular standouts such as Pericles and Socrates, as well as Aspasia being characters that I was genuinely interested in terms of the dialogue and interactions they had with the protagonist throughout the narrative. There was one character from Sparta that I found intriguing, which was Brasidius, but he really did not have enough time to create a large impact on me, and I really wish he had a little more screen time to make his death much more impactful for the player. Phoebe was also a great little sister sort of character for Cassandra, and her death is easily the most emotional moment in the story for me, and I think the writers did great in constantly bringing her back to doing tasks in Athens that made it even more tragic when she was killed by the cultists. I think other than that, the game's other side characters don't exactly have too much time to shine. Although I did enjoy the moments with Barnabas, they weren't exactly plentiful and weren't major components of the overarching story told throughout the game. A point that really made the story interesting past the point of finding her mother was the extremely difficult task of trying to bring Alexios away from his brainwashing, and in this department I think the story needed a little bit more fleshing out. Being able to bring him back from where he currently is in terms of his place in the cult really depends on maybe 3 or 4 points within the span of 2 hours, in which the menial dialogue options you choose within these scenarios dictates what ending of the story will be for you. I think the story had great build up to finding Cassandra's mother and venturing from island to Athens, and then meeting a few select people within the large city that may be capable of helping her, which was a great way of building up the plot point of finally reuniting with the mother. And I think it's this great build up that makes that plot point's closure so satisfying. This entire part of the game was easily my favorite in terms of the story aspect of the game, and Cassandra's nervousness in finally seeing her mother again was a great scene, and I really enjoyed going through that entire journey. Sadly, the same can't really be said for the eventual character development of Alexios and his turn back to his family. The game really did not give him the story moments that he needed to make this turn a lot more realistic, and it really felt like he just randomly switched a button in his head, as even in the cutscene where he eventually becomes good, less than 30 seconds prior, he was willing to kill Cassandra and his mother, and even laughed at the notion of a family together. I think the cutscenes featuring Alexios are only a few in number, and if he just had a couple more hours of impactful and well-written screen time, the turn of his character by the end of the story would have made a lot more sense. But the way it actually happened left me wanting more, to be honest. I was just confused that that was it, and that the story really just ended in such a fast manner without any major build-up in him finally reintegrating with his family. That made the ending a lot less satisfying than I would have liked, but in general I really did enjoy the intrigue of the cultists, and in particular their desire to hunt down Cassandra's family, and easily the most interesting plot point of all was trying to find Cassandra's mother. I think Alexios had a lot of potential as a character as well, but it felt really rushed, which made the ending of an otherwise pretty great story pretty poor in my personal opinion. Now getting into the gameplay and world of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I've already said in my earlier review of the game that this game is easily one of the best looking games in the entire franchise, if not the best looking game. Ancient Greece's open world is gigantic in scope, but it's also beautiful and in many aspects rich with detail and things to explore. In terms of what you'll be exploring or doing around this world, there are many cities across all the islands that you can venture into, with the two core cities that are standouts among the crowd being Sparta and Athens. These cities aren't only gigantic in comparison to all of the other cities within the game, but are also beautiful and capture every aspect of ancient Greek culture in a great manner. In terms of actual things to do in this open world, these are mainly combat-centric places, such as the different forts, leader houses, and various other military or bandit camps that you can take down as you venture across this open world environment. The game is gigantic, and to truly venture across the world and see everything, you have to travel thousands of meters with your boat and on horseback as well. I can't even count how many islands are in the game, and some are gigantic and connected, such as the ones that wield the cities of Athens and Sparta. But then there is the more sporadic islands spread out across the world, such as the island of Naxos, which is where Cassandra actually finds her mother. Some of these islands I haven't even been to and just got to recently only because of the presence of a cultist on the island. The main story won't really take you across the entire expanse of this open world, and that's really up to you as to whether or not you want to experience every part of this open world environment. But even the parts that the story does take you to, from large cities to the smaller ones, all of them are absolutely stunning, and it takes a long time to travel from one place to another, especially if you're going from one island to another. This made the entire game itself feel even larger in scope, and made the mission of Cassandra feel like something truly grand in nature, which only really added to my immersion as I tried not to use fast travel for anything related to traveling for the main story of the game. Getting back to the forts and camps I mentioned earlier, that's the bulk of what you'll be doing in this open world, other than running around the towns and seeing all that they have to offer in terms of their beauty and detail. Of course, there are a bunch of side quests throughout this world, but these do vary in quality, with some of them being really interesting, while others just contain the same sort of formula of either fetching something for an NPC, or hunting down someone, or just taking down a camp. It can become a very repetitive formula in the side quests, and I haven't done too many of them other than to try and get some extra XP to push me over to the next level. The best part of taking down all of these forts and different camps is the little objectives you do within them, such as pillaging the nation's chest, taking down the captains and polemarch, and of course taking down the leader of that specific region. That's because doing all of these activities, in addition to a few others such as burning the war supplies of a particular region, will lower the nation level to a point in which you'll be able to engage in a conquest battle, in which you can choose which side you'd like to support in the big battle, either Athens or Sparta. The attacking side will of of course face much more difficulty, but you'll be rewarded with much more gear than if you were to just defend a nation. This mechanic is really fun, and I like the scale of the conquest battles, even if they did become quite repetitive if you did them over and over again. Odyssey's open world does have problems though, as despite its visuals and the details that are in this world, many of the smaller towns lack the same attention to detail, and I really just copy pasted from the bigger towns, which can make some of these areas really feel the same, and sometimes particular locations within the map will just blend together. This is really annoying, especially when you venture to a faraway island just for the city of that particular region to look like Athens or Sparta, for example. This is of course expected as for an open world this gigantic, but it does beg the question as to the existence of many of the smaller islands, which honestly encapsulate the notion of quantity over quality in comparison to the much larger cities such as Athens, which are quite detailed and filled with quality. Before we wrap up our discussion of the game, I want to talk about the game's combat for a little bit. I think we'll start with stealth because there's not too much to say in this regard. The stealth is pretty much the exact same as Assassin's Creed Origins in terms of mechanics, although you are lacking the hidden blade and its satisfying animations, instead doing stealth with the spear of Leonidas that you carry throughout the game. This kind of breaks the entire assassin fantasy that the franchise is known for, but I will say that I was able to do a lot of stealth throughout the game, and I was able to take down a number of key enemies within the story and just throughout the open world by simply sneaking into an area and assassinating them and leaving without alerting a single guard. In fact, entire forts and camps can be cleared in this way, but the game clearly isn't a stealth focused game. Some of the skills you get in the game, such as the critical assassination and the spear of Leonidas ability, can make the stealth kind of unrealistic. As you level up, however, stealth does falter in some regards if you're not constantly upgrading your spear and using skill points in the stealth category, as you'll begin to only do half of an enemy's health bar, which kind of defeats the entire purpose of the stealth in the first place. Abilities such as the spear of Leonidas literally allows you to teleport from one enemy to another, and you can chain this in multiple instances, taking down enemies in a stealthy manner. Although this is not realistic at all, I won't say that I didn't have fun messing around with this skill as well as the general stealth in the game, despite the fact that missions are clearly not designed with any stealth in mind. In terms of the actual combat in the game, it is really fun, and the game really leans into the entire Greek hero fantasy and is a full-fledged RPG in comparison to prior games in the franchise. There's numbers flying all over the screen, and as you get high level, they won't mean very much, such as when you land a shot that does 200,000 damage but only takes a fifth of the enemy's actual health bar. The game's combat system really revolves around two other key mechanics, and that is the various skills you can unlock and utilize within combat in addition to the game's gear system. Starting with the skills mechanic, these are numerous, such as the Spartan kick, putting your blade on fire within combat, and a bunch of other skills that you may see throughout this background footage that can be directly used within the combat scenarios of the game and really add diversity to all of the clicking you're doing in order to take down your enemies. I had a lot of fun playing around with the different skills and switching them in and out in order to experiment with what did the most damage and what was the most effective against different types of enemies. The skill tree isn't gigantic as well and is super easy to read and understand, which didn't make it an absolute pain to see what exactly I was upgrading, which is a big problem that plagues a game such as Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Onto the other component of the combat system in the gear system of the game, you'll be constantly picking up gear every single encounter you have with enemies. Every time you kill a captain, a polemarch, or even a random soldier, and especially in the case of the mercenaries that you'll constantly be hunted by throughout the game, you're going to pick up a piece of gear, or in the case of some particular enemies, even multiple pieces of gear. There is a gear capacity, however, so once you reach it, you'll constantly be selling different pieces of gear that you don't require anymore. And as you rapidly level up and get stronger in the game, if you've got some sort of legendary gear you'd like to continue using as I did, you'll need to continuously go to a blacksmith every few levels in order to upgrade your gear. A system that I haven't messed around too much with in terms of the gear is the engraving system, which is how you actually build the most powerful loadouts in this game for combat, as these modifiers for different things such as more armor or more fire damage, for example, need to be tailored to fit exactly what you want. I was utilizing a poison build before with a poison dagger and clothes that boosted my poison damage, which made the build extremely powerful in inflicting the poison effect effect on enemies. The combat here overall is extremely fun, and I really do enjoy it, but it is a great departure from the roots of the series, and the combat really leans much more into the RPG elements of games rather than the franchise's simple systems that we saw in the Ezio games, for example. To wrap up, I really was wrong about Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and although the game does have many flaws in terms of its story and open world components and the overall gameplay in a select few aspects, the overall package here is really great, and even if it is a departure from what the series at its roots really is. It took me a while to get over the fact that it didn't at all add to the fantasy of actually being an assassin, and once I did get over this, I realized that this game really is great, and all of the hate it was previously getting isn't warranted in many regards. I really hope you all enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.